Then I'll just run through briefly what we're hoping to cover with you. We'll start by briefly introducing the team here at the CMA who are leading our 2 recruitment campaigns for assistant directors and principal case officers in our cartels and antitrust team. And then I'm going to ask Christian to give us a brief introduction really on the CMA, what we do here and what those 2 teams do before we hand over to the stars of our show, our wonderful teammates who are going to tell you what the day job is really like at the CMA. So we've got colleagues there to talk to you from London, Manchester and Edinburgh. And we're also joined by Elisa, who's in our Belfast office, who can tell you a bit about our location over there as well. We will wrap up just with a reminder of some of the key dates for this campaign, run you through how our recruitment process will work with Tom, and then we have left time at the end for any questions. So please do feel free to drop them in the chat. If they're straightforward and we can answer them as we go, we will. Otherwise, we'll scoop up any questions at the end of the session. So, as I said, first, brief introductions from the recruitment panel. My name is Deborah Wilkie. I'm a director in both our cartels and our antitrust team. So delighted to be here tonight. I work on, at the moment, an antitrust investigation into Meta, where we're consulting on some commitments, and that's in our digital space. But I also head up our leniency team in cartels. So I'm involved in working through a pipeline of cases to see what might be our next cartel investigation. As well as that, I've also had a go at some consumer cases, and I'm proud to say I'm a committee member of our women's network as well. So that's me, and I will next hand over to Sue.
Hello all, I'm a director based in antitrust primarily. I joined the civil service actually quite early in my career before moving into the Office of Fair Trading and starting to specialise in competition issues. Most of my career then in the Office of Fair Trading and then in the CMA, but working on a wide range of cases over that time, from the very first CA98 case many years ago, Nat Pharmaceuticals, through price fixing in toys, a brief stint on some dairy cases, quite a few resale price maintenance cases, and more recently a pharmaceutical case. Though I have had time, so over all of that, it sounds like I've been here a very long time, but I have had a very wide range of roles. And I've been away on maternity leave a couple of times and also had a secondment opportunity to the Civil Service Training College, which used to exist, in charge of economic and analytical programmes there. So lots of opportunities, as I said, to do lots of different roles. I've been in a central role, in a strategy role, responsible for our annual plan and annual report. I've also more recently worked on a phase 2 merger and now currently on a regulatory appeal. So we do move about a bit as required. I've also worked part-time since I joined the CMA, the Office of Fair Trading, in fact. So pretty much most of my career after my first child was born. And I've been really grateful, I think, and really appreciated the opportunity to continue to work flexibly and part-time while raising my children and still progressing in my career. But that's me.
Great. Thanks, Sue. And I'm sorry, it seems like a couple of people are struggling with sound. It looks like most people do have sound, so apologies for those people struggling still. We will also try and speak up in the room. Don't know if we're softly spoken tonight. I'm going to next hand over to the team who are running our Principal Case Officer campaign, and that is Dan.
Hi everyone, it's really nice to see you. Thank you very much for giving us your time this evening, and nice to see so many of you. My name is Dan Rawling, and I'm a director in the cartel enforcement team here at the CMA, currently working on an investigation into sports broadcasting. You may have seen an announcement we made about suspected information sharing in relation to sports broadcasting. I've had a background in competition law and consumer enforcement since 2006, when, like Sue, I joined our predecessor, the Office of Fair Trading. I started out as an executive officer there, working on access to file matters. I've had a few sideways steps to other regulators and other bodies like the Bank of England and the Payment Systems Regulator. So always been sort of there or thereabouts around public sector regulation and economic regulation. Really enjoyed coming back to the CMA to work on policy matters in our Policy and International team. Quite a lot to do with COVID-19 policy as well, with the COVID-19 task force a few years ago. And after my policy stint, headed over to the enforcement side to work on some live cases, which I'm really enjoying. And I look forward to working with others of you, hopefully, in the future. Thanks, Deborah.
Thanks, Dan. And last but not least, I'm going to hand over to Christian, who's also working on the Principal Case Officer campaign. And then Christian, after you've done kind of a bit on your own background, if you can sort of follow up with a bit about what the CMA does and our two teams that we're recruiting for today.
Brilliant. Well, I'm Christiane Williams, and I'm currently based in the antitrust enforcement team, but I'm actually working on a cartels case in the cartels team. So a bit of a theme there that you do move around when you're at the CMA. I'm working on the case which you've probably seen on our website around fragrances and a suspected agreement information exchange between suppliers of consumer fragrances. That's the sort of thing that you put in your detergent and your shampoo and your toothpaste. So that's what I'm currently working on, but like others, I have worked across most of the areas of the CMA in my time. So I've worked not just on competition enforcement cases, I've also worked in our markets investigations area and also in mergers area. I've also had a stint in policy. But I won't keep listing all the things I've done because you're probably bored by now, but it just shows that there's a huge variety here. And that's probably one of the things I wanted to major on about the CMA. As you know, the CMA is the UK's principal competition and consumer body. What does that actually mean? Well, it means that what we're here to do is to promote competition for everyone's benefit, including ours on this call, and for the benefit of taxpayers, and also to try and prevent unfair business practices, which are bad not only for consumers and taxpayers, but they're also bad for businesses and their competitors. So that's what we do. We do it in a number of ways, and one of the ways is through our enforcement work, which is enforcing particular pieces of legislation which prohibit certain types of conduct. And the competition enforcement teams focus on competition legislation under the Competition Act, which prevents unfair agreements and unfair practices undertaken by big, powerful companies. So the cartels enforcement team, they specialize on what we call hardcore infringements, hardcore cartels, which is essentially agreements between what should be competing businesses on prices and markets and sharing customers, that sort of thing. And antitrust sort of does the rest. Other types of agreements and practices by big, powerful companies. So that's the enforcement teams. Both teams work very much together. As you saw, I'm currently working in cartels, even though I'm principally based in antitrust. But we work on a team-based work ethos, and that includes working with a whole raft of people, both within the enforcement teams, such as our investigators and casework support officers, but also we also work with colleagues across the CMA, whether they be based in our legal service, whether they be based in our economics directorates or in our intelligence directorates, or indeed in our digital forensics or in policy and international. So if you're working on a big investigation, you'll be working with lots of people from all sorts of different backgrounds. And you'll also be involved in all sorts of work, not just linked to the investigation itself, but also as part of our leniency program or developing policy or coordinating with other colleagues. I mentioned the case I'm currently on. Well, there are other parallel investigations being undertaken by the EU and the Department of Justice and the Swiss authorities. So I'm spending a lot of time talking to those authorities as well. I won't say any more about investigations because my colleagues are going to detail you much more about what they do day to day. Like Sue, I've always worked full time, but in the last few years, I have now worked what's called condensed hours, which means I work 9 days. I do my 10 days in 9 days, which gives me alternate Fridays to do what I wish, which is rather nice way of working. But that's all I wanted to say, unless I've forgotten something.
No, that sounds great. And we can pick up lots of things that we could all talk about. I mean, I certainly feel like since I joined the CMA actually in its early days, and since then I was sort of thinking through what I'd worked on, and it's really everything from start to finish. So from kind of warrant applications through to, you know, dawn raids, investigations, drafting the decisions, seeing the decisions, I'm glad to say, successfully defended in the Competition Appeal Tribunal, in the Court of Appeal. So some really exciting stuff that we've got going on, but that's enough from your recruitment panel. What we wanted to do today was let you meet some of the team so they can tell you in their own words what it's like working here. And first of those is Jenny, who's just popped up. Jenny, go ahead.
Hi, thanks, Deborah. Hi, everyone. So I'm Jenny Brady, and I work in the cartels team. I'm an assistant project director. I've now been in the cartels team in that role for 6 years. So I joined in 2017. I originally trained at Linklaters and did kind of 2 years post-qualification there. I then did a 2-year stint in what was the OFT at the time, but in the mergers team, and that was a grade 7 principal case officer. I then went back to private practice for a few years, and then finally joined the cartels team in 2017. It's probably worth saying I hadn't done a huge amount of cartels work before joining the cartels team. I'd often done, you know, I'd done a lot of the kind of merger control. I've done a little bit of abuse of dominant, but I really hadn't kind of touched on cartels, but it was always something that I thought I might find quite interesting. And that has very much proved to be the case, which can be seen from the fact that I've stayed for 6 years. I've worked on 2 cases in my time, partly because I did a little stint in antitrust as well, but they've been very different in nature, those 2 cases. So the first was a sort of smaller smaller case in the construction industry, and the second, which I'm still currently working on, is a large kind of multinational case in the automotive industry, with a large number of parties, all kind of global parties. And we are also working alongside the European Commission on this one. So I think the case is the sort of first post-Brexit case where we launched a case at the same time as the Commission. So that was sort of a bit of a learning process, but that's been really interesting. The case itself has a lot of interesting legal issues as well, which I've really enjoyed working through. Kind of gives me flashbacks to being in law firms. What I found, so although, you know, you're probably thinking, oh, she's been at in the cartels team for 6 years, but only done 2 cases. How is that possible? I think, I mean, I'll touch on some maternity leaves later on, but it's partly, you know, these cases do take a fair bit of time, so they can take kind of 2 to 3 years. But it is worth saying that within that, there's a sort of lifetime of a case, so it changes in stage. So at the beginning, you start off and you're kind of in the investigatory phase. You do your dawn raids, document collection, review, interviews, and then the case moves on to the more kind of analysis, and then overlapping with sort of drafting, calculating penalties if there are any, that kind of stage. And I'd say certain, you know, the investigatory stage is very interesting for obvious reasons. You know, that's where you're kind of learning what happened, and, you know, dawn raids, and it's all quite exciting. And then you move on to the analysis and drafting stage, which is, you know, as kind of a previous lawyer, it brings me back to my kind of legal skills. And I think there's something really satisfying about knowing that what you're drafting will be published, and, you know, will also potentially be under scrutiny by the courts. You know, it kind of gives a real sort of, it really focuses the mind, I guess, to making sure. And, you know, I've learned so much in my drafting in the last 6 years about kind of trying to make things legally robust. And that's, I think, been really good for my kind of learning and development. I think a few things that I like about the CMA versus kind of my time in private practice. So I think predictability of the type of work you're going to be doing. So, you know, as I mentioned, the case is long, but there are different stages and you're kind of running it, and you can sort of see, you can look forward to knowing what you're going to be doing next. And you know, there are times where it's busy, but you know that that's coming up. You know, you're not getting the sort of the call from the client the next day saying, oh, can you work on this big piece of work unpredictably? So, you know, it's sort of that I kind of know what's to expect in my working life. I quite like that. You also get a lot of responsibility. That's something that really struck me actually when I first came to the OFT mergers group. You know, when I was kind of leading calls, often you're leading calls and kind of on the other side, you've got the partners of law firms leading for the parties, and you're kind of, you know, it feels great that you're trusted to do that. And I think you learn a lot by doing that, you know, in terms of presentation and communication skills. I think the other aspect that I really like is that there's a sort of underlying feeling of looking for the right answer. You know, you're not sort of looking at things in a kind of, oh, how can I twist this for the benefit or the interests of my client? You know, it's very much a kind of, I guess it feels quite objective in that way. You know, what's the real impact of this agreement on the consumer, on competition? And there's a real sort of atmosphere or environment of encouraging challenge. So, you know, sometimes there can be different views on that, and there's always a sense of no matter how junior you are, you're always encouraged to speak up and ask the questions and that kind of thing. Then I guess moving on just to a more personal level, I relocated to the Edinburgh office last April, for kind of lifestyle reasons, really. I had 2 young children, and I thought the Edinburgh life seemed quite appealing. And when I first raised it with the CMA, they're incredibly supportive and encouraging. And I actually had to delay the move in the end because we couldn't get nursery spaces in time, and there was just kind of no issue whatsoever from a CMA perspective. It was great. They kind of, you know, really kind of understood. It was slightly different for my husband, who ended up having to do lots of trips up to Edinburgh for his work. So, you know, I think that is kind of moments like that when you realize you have a very understanding employer. And from a work perspective, it was also really smooth. So I'm still working on the case that I was working on down in London, with the same team that are primarily based in London, but it works really well. You know, I dial in, and actually, you know, because people will be working from home occasionally as well, there's lots of people dialing in, so I don't feel at all out of the loop. There's also a really good cohort of cartels people up here, so I think we've got 6 or 7 of us now, so it really feels like you're still part of the team. It's really nice. Overall, the office is about 80 people, and that's a really nice number, so you know, you feel like you get to know other areas of the CMA as well. And then finally, I mentioned I was going to just touch on maternity leave, so it just kind of goes on the flexibility, and I think sort of echoing what Christiane said. So I had 2 maternity leaves, and I was off for a year for both, and I accumulated my annual leave during those periods, and the CMA were happy for me to take that as a kind of day off per week when I came back. So I went back to working as 4 days a week, even though I kind of wasn't formally going down to 4 days a week. So that was great, and that made kind of transitioning back into work a lot easier. And then when that came to an end, I then applied for compressed hours, which I think is sort of the similar pattern to what Christiane mentioned she does. So I now do 10 days in 9, which I find works really well, partly because my Edinburgh commute is kind of 15 minutes, slight plug there for the Edinburgh office, but you know, it's great. So I can easily fit in the kind of small extra time during the day on other days, and then I get every other Friday to kind of do what I want, which is great for the family. And I think that was all I was going to say. Very happy to answer questions at the end, but in the meantime, I will pass on to Sarah, I think.
That's great. Thanks, Jenny. And she's being very coy, but the commute also involves basically walking down the Royal Mile. I can attest. It is a great commute to work in Edinburgh. Sarah, tell us about Manchester.
Hi everyone, I'm Sarah Cawthorne. I'm a Principal Case Officer in Antitrust, and I work in our new Manchester office. Our Manchester office has been opened just about almost exactly a year now, and I was one of the first people to move into that office. I joined the CMA in July 2020, but I live in York, so I'd been waiting happily for the Northern office to open for a while. And it's a really wonderful team that we're building there. We're quite small at the moment, but we're growing every week. There are more people joining all the time. We're moving to a new office in Christmas that will be able to better accommodate us all, and we're going to be sort of really buoyed out as the digital markets unit in particular begins to grow. But it's a really, really friendly group of people and a sort of a really nice way of getting to know people across different parts of the office. I mean, the CMA is a kind of a perfect setup for flexible working, really, because I work with teams in London, we work hybridly, but also the CMA is really supportive of inter-office travel. So we get to come down to London fairly regularly. Antitrust holds Antitrust Anchor Days, for example, and I'm coming down this week for that. And that's all paid for by the office to make sure that we're sort of interacting with our teams and in our directorates. So big plug for Manchester. Very happy to take any questions on Manchester that anyone has. In terms of my background, I mean, I said I joined in July 2020, and before that I probably had a fairly unconventional route into the CMA, although once you start talking to people in the CMA, you'll find there are lots of people with similarly diverse backgrounds. So I didn't have any competition, legal, economic experience before I joined. I'd come out of a PhD in 17th century literature. I'd done a bit of teaching. I was working in a university library when I applied for the CMA job. And I was looking for roles where I would be able to use my analytical skills, but that were kind of more team focused and where I would feel like I was doing something really useful for society. And I chanced across the CMA job advert, which had cartels and dawn raids in the title, and I thought it sounded really exciting. And I sort of didn't expect to end up at the CMA, as I thought, oh well, I have no competition experience. This is clearly not for me. But I got the job and absolutely loved it. So I started as a HEO and moved up to grade 7. And one of the reasons I really love the work is because you get to immerse yourself in like a different sector, a different field on every case. You get to like develop this quite in-depth knowledge of different kind of arcane little bits of business that you had no idea ever existed. So I started on a pharmaceuticals case, which was fascinating. I'm now on a digital case, and I've been on a couple of other digital cases as well. And I really like that you also do something, you know, you're kind of doing something different most days. So as Jenny said, as you move from case to case, you take up different sort of phases, I guess. So you might be involved in evidence review 1 month, you might be working on access to file the next. You might be doing a bit of project management, you might be drafting up decisions or documents for courts. So it's always something like throwing something new and challenging at you, and I find that really exciting. So I would highly recommend it. And the CMA also put me through the King's postgraduate diploma in competition a couple of years ago. So that really helped to like develop my specialist expertise. We've got a really good learning programme. So there's lots of opportunities from that as well. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I'd want to cover. I mean, I'd sort of echo what everyone else has said. I don't work compressed hours, but I work flexi time. So when I'm in the Manchester office, I have a reasonable commute. So I tend to leave the office earlier and then work longer on days where I'm at home. And most of us are working at least a couple of days from home. So we're very well suited to hybrid working. And I find the flexibility that gives me and the ability to be where I want to be really, really valuable. I would also just say, I think some of the people that I work with at the CMA are like the most interesting people that I've worked with. They're really smart, really switched on. They give you lots of opportunities. And I think we're always looking for ways to improve what we're doing as well. So I'm involved in the local action plan for antitrust, which means I'm a part of a team who are always looking for ways to improve what we do and innovate with what we do. So we've been using new technology to get people engaged in what we can be doing to improve, to get feedback and new suggestions. and try and implement those across the organisation. And the CMA really places a premium on you being able to sort of contribute to the corporate culture as well as to your casework. And I've really valued that opportunity too. So yeah, I think that is all from me.
That is great, Sarah, and we are so grateful for your teacher skills, because the way that you corral the antitrust team to get some great ideas out of people is brilliant. So unless there's anything else, Sarah, you wanted to cover right now, I'm going to take us next to Rachel, who hopefully will appear on your screen. Right, I'm going to hand over to you now, Rachel. In London, I feel like a Eurovision song contest host here. We're now moving to London with Rachel.
Thanks, Deborah. Yeah, so I'm Rachel. I joined the cartels team at the CMA as principal case officer in December 2021. So I've been here for a little bit over 18 months now. I also, like Jenny, started out in private practice. I spent 12 months of my training contract in competition seats across London and Brussels. I then qualified as an associate at the start of 2020, in that horrible beginning of the pandemic period. And then after about 18 months as a junior associate, whilst it'd been a great learning experience, I decided that maybe the world of private practice wasn't somewhere that was going to be sustainable for me in the long term. So I started to think about alternative paths that might allow me to get a bit of a better work-life balance and to pursue interests outside of my career. So when I saw that the CMA were advertising for principal case officers, that seemed like a good way of continuing with the subject matter of competition law, but hopefully more sustainably, and as Jenny said, with a more predictable day-to-day life in the long term. So I work from our London office in Canary Wharf, which I have to say has been a great place to get to know colleagues right across the CMA. And it's a very new office and much nicer than I had perhaps expected of joining the civil service. In the time I've been here, I've worked on our investigation around procurement processes at immigration removal centres in the UK. You might have seen that we issued a decision that there were no grounds for action earlier this year. But as the principal case officer on that matter, I had the opportunity to get involved in almost all aspects of the investigation right from the start. So as Jenny mentioned, there is this kind of life cycle to the case. So the tasks that I had the chance to get involved with were kind of anything from drafting the initial information request to parties, contributing to decisions about further evidence gathering, helping to shape our evidence review strategy. I led calls with external stakeholders, liaised with the CMA's comms team when it came to kind of public announcements, right through to checking and inputting the drafting of the final decision in the case. I found that as the principal case officer, you're kind of the person that's given the time and trusted to get to know the evidence the most, which is something that I personally find really interesting. Like I really like getting hands-on on the subject of the case. And you'll also, as Jenny touched on, be given responsibility to kind of run with certain tasks, discrete work streams, whether that's kind of putting together internal governance documents or planning for access to file, maybe being the initial point of contact for external stakeholders or some of the parties to the case. But I have found that kind of in the grade 7 role, you can always turn to the assistant director or the director on the project for guidance when you need it. There's always regular team meetings, one-to-ones with other members of your team, so you're able to ask for any of the help and support that you need. You'll also quite often have a case officer who you could be responsible for work managing, and you can share kind of day-to-day tasks with them. Recently, I've taken on responsibility for staff managing a member of the cartels team, which is a slightly separate role. So it would be somebody that you don't typically work with, but you get responsibility for kind of overseeing their development, carrying out appraisals, generally kind of acting as their first port of call for any questions and any support that they need. I know it's already been mentioned, but I did just want to touch on the opportunity in the cartels team to volunteer to get involved in dorm raids or inspections, just because I think that's a really kind of novel piece of what the cartels team do, and quite exciting. So I've had a chance to do that, as well as to produce court applications to obtain warrants to conduct dawn raids. And helping with inspections is something that everyone is encouraged to get involved in. While it can be quite intense, there's normally quite good camaraderie between the team. So it is a really exciting time, and it's a great way of getting to know people working on other matters within the CMA. I guess whilst you'll generally be working on one investigation at a time, some of the others have touched on non-project work or groups that you might want to get involved in at the CMA. And one of my favourite parts of the job is being involved in the leniency team. So the leniency team sit within Cartels, and they are responsible for handling all the applications that we get in from companies or individuals that want to report their involvement in cartel conduct. And that's with the hope of obtaining immunity or reduction in penalties. The leniency team see that process right through from the start to the end. So from the initial phone call where we get reports of the conduct, to taking statements from the applicant and reviewing the evidence, to then finally helping to make a prioritisation decision. So whether we should launch an investigation into the conduct, whether we might want to issue warning or advisory letters, or otherwise how we want to deal with the matter. And it's something that I found often challenges you to consider a range of issues that you might typically encounter across the kind of the longer case time frame, but in a much shorter space of time, and often with more responsibility for managing relationships with external parties, whether that's the applicant themselves or one of our concurrent regulators. I particularly enjoy getting the kind of insight into how the CMA think about their pipeline of future enforcement action, the factors that might make something a good case, or what we think might benefit consumers the most or be the best use of our resources. But there are a number of other non-project things that you can get involved in. So I've also spent time working on Cartel's international engagement. And over the past year, that's included things like we hosted a webinar, kind of a knowledge sharing webinar between a number of different competition authorities across the world. I've also contributed to papers on topics such as algorithmic collusion, and also on the implementation of effective leniency programs, both of which would be discussed at an international level. So I think that was kind of a quick canter through the various things that I've been involved in since joining. I would say that it's definitely provided the work-life balance that I wanted when I first applied. But perhaps the bigger benefit that I didn't appreciate when I applied is the culture here, kind of more specifically, the support that you get to pursue the kind of aspects of the work that most interest you, as well as the encouragement to contribute to even the most strategic decisions on the project, regardless of your level of experience. I think that's everything I'd planned to say today.
That is great. Thank you, Rachel. And thank you for being on the leniency team. We love having you on that team. So last of our kind of team members in antitrust, I'm going to hand over now to Erin.
Thanks very much, Deborah. So hi, everyone. My name is Erin Kilich. I'm an assistant director in the antitrust team, and I actually joined the CMA about 1.5 years ago as a principal case officer. So I'm going to give some insights on moving to the CMA based on my own experiences. And in particular, I'm going to focus on things that I was particularly intrigued about at the time that I was applying, and also some things that I was maybe a little bit slightly apprehensive about as well. So just to give you all a bit of background about myself, I trained as a solicitor at an international law firm in London, and I qualified into the competition team, where I then spent 5 years as an associate. So I was already familiar with the CMA from working on the other side of cases, and I began to feel less satisfied in my role and to think about making the jump over. So around this time, and I still remember it quite well, there were 3 main things that drew me to working at the CMA. And I imagine that these are some things that you're potentially thinking about, and I'm going to give a view on how they stack up now that I'm here. So the first of these is quality of work. So if you're interested at all in competition law, there's nowhere better to work than the CMA. Our work is frequently in the news, and you'll get to work on the most important, often precedent-setting cases in the UK. It's a particularly exciting time to join the CMA, given that we're taking on complex and large cases post-Brexit that would have otherwise gone to the European Commission. And there's, of course, the new Digital Markets Unit, which is going to do excellent work in regulating digital markets. And I think it's fair to say the CMA has become a world-leading competition authority. Also in quality of work, there are no boring cases here. There were some times in private practice where I felt like a glorified form filler, just working on cases where there were no competition issues at all, or very minor ones. But all of our cases here are likely to have substantial competition issues, and that's the reason why we're investigating them in the first place. I'm also going to include a bit of a plug for the antitrust department. So I think antitrust cases are the most interesting competition law cases.
Oh, Erin.
Yeah, it's controversial. It's
Erin.
controversial. Yeah, it is. It is. But this is my personal view. Speaking for myself only, of course. But I'll say that the reason why I think this is because they often involve novel theories of harm, particularly concentrated markets where the stakes are particularly high. And you will have seen that in recent years we've had a lot of really important pharma and digital cases. Now, very few will get to work routinely on these kinds of cases outside of the CMA. And even if you are lucky enough to do so, it's probably the case that you're cobbling together responses to requests for information rather than doing substantive analysis, at least in my experience. So that's on quality of work. Now, the second thing that drew me to the CMA was somewhere where I could do a job that gave me purpose and meaning. So the work that we do here matters. It matters to consumers, to businesses, and often to the most vulnerable in society. Now, for example, we recently won an appeal against our decision in the recent liothyronine case, if I've got that right. And this is a case where we investigated a pharma company for increasing prices of an essential medicine by 1,000%. So I'd press you to think about what you're currently doing and whether it really matters. What impacts are you having? Are you making things better? The CMA does work that has real, tangible benefits for society, and I believe that working here can give you a sense of purpose that you might perhaps be missing. And so, moving on to the final thing that drew me to the CMA. So, as others have already mentioned already, there is obviously the work-life balance issue. So, some of you will know if you're working as a lawyer or an economist in the private sector, it can be incredibly demanding and require you to make many sacrifices. And having been here now, I can say that the CMA offers a much better work-life balance. And in my experience, it really does live up to the hype. So I've never had to cancel any evening or weekend plans since I started here. I've never been required to work outside of my core hours. And whilst we do have work phones, I've completely lost my old habit of obsessively checking my emails in the evenings. In addition to actually just having better hours, our cases are well resourced, so you have enough people working on them, and you feel like you have sufficient time to do work properly, and can take pride in what you do and the quality of your work. And as others have mentioned, I'm not going to go on about this, but obviously we do have flexible working arrangements, and there really is a large number of people that do take this up. It's not like a gimmick. It really is something that people do take advantage of. So look, that's why I joined the CMA. But some of you might have some questions in the back of your mind, some things you're concerned about. So I'm going to touch on the things that I thought about before taking the plunge to join the CMA, and hopefully I can reassure some of you that may have similar concerns. So the first thing is, well, what about my legal skills? So I applied for a role in the antitrust team. This is a delivery role, which means that you're part of the core case team responsible for delivering the project. And you can bring in expertise from staff in other professions like legal and the economics profession where relevant. But there is a separate legal department at the CMA, and lawyers from that department are assigned to case teams. So coming from private practice, I was worried about being able to keep up my legal skills and whether I'd be able to actually use them in my role, given that I'm in a delivery team. And the short answer to this is that many of the delivery staff are lawyers and are economists, and they do use their expertise to add value on their cases. So although I am in the delivery role, day to day, it doesn't really feel very different to being a lawyer in private practice. There are, of course, some differences. If you were to work in the legal team, for example, it's likely that you'll get more involved in advising on procedural issues or really specific knotty points of law. I think it's also fair to say that you might take a backseat on things like strategy, and you might be not so close to the details of the case. In my experience, working on a delivery team, you'll be as involved as anyone else in terms of the substantive parts of the case, and for me, that's really what matters. Also, just to say on this, you might think, well, I'd like to work in the delivery team, but I'm not really sure. I'm not really sure if that's what I want to do forever, or maybe I want to get some experience elsewhere. And just to say, it is possible to move between teams at the CMA, whether temporarily or on a permanent basis if a role comes up. And again, this is something that does genuinely happen, not a hypothetical. So another thing that I thought about before I joined was, and that was a sort of niggling worry in the back of my head. So what are the prospects for career progression and promotion at the CMA? So I thought it might be quite hard to progress, as unlike private practice, there isn't a clear promotion structure where you're promoted to a senior associate after 5 years, for example. And I was worried that I might struggle to be promoted coming in as a new hire and having to compete against those who have been at the CMA for longer. However, in reality, I found that it is very possible to advance, and I was lucky enough to be promoted to an assistant director within a year. So in terms of are there prospects for progression, I think the clear answer is that there are, and certainly was in my experience. So two more issues to cover. So the first is another concern I had was is this the right level to go in at? So obviously with the current recruitment campaigns, you've got the principal case officer role and you've got the assistant director role. And so at the time, I felt like I was kind of in between and I wasn't really sure which one to go for. I ended up applying and joining as a principal case officer. And part of the reason for that is just that I knew people around my level who were on secondment at the CMA and they were PCAs, and that seemed like it could be a good fit. But I did have some niggling concerns about whether I might be properly stretched or given access to interesting work and other opportunities. However, what I found was that everyone at the CMA was actually really keen to get the most out of my experience. And I was lucky enough to be given more responsibility than you might typically get as a PCA. I was also given a great deal of support and encouragement for going for a promotion as well. So I think my takeaway here is, if you do join, people here will be really keen to ensure that you're working at the right level. And if you are, for example, close to the next level up, you will be, at least in my experience, given opportunities to start doing that work and then being supported in moving up should any opportunities for promotion come up. So the final thing I want to talk about is my concern about the variety of work. So as some of you know, if you do work in competition or in private practice, whether as a lawyer or economist, you might work across a range of different competition law matters, mergers, cartel cases, maybe even things like state aid. I was really interested in the antitrust team and working on antitrust cases, but I wasn't, entirely sure about closing the door on other work. And what I found since I've been here is that actually many team members, for example, even in the antitrust department, have been seconded to other teams. And we now have what's called a major and minor model, where soon you'll be able to select up to 3 minors. So these other teams within the CMA, it could be cartels if you're an antitrust, or it could be mergers or whatever else, or even consumer, where you might get the opportunity to work at some point, for example, if resources needed. So hopefully that gives a bit of comfort to those of you who are interested in working across different types of competition law. So I hope that's all been helpful, and I think now I'll be passing over to Elisa.
That's great. Thanks, Erin. Hi, Elisa.
Hi, everyone. I am here to talk to you today about working from the Belfast office and also interacting with the cartels team. So my name is Elisa Hutchinson and I'm a legal director based in our Belfast office. Our Belfast office has been established for about 10 years, for as long as the CMA has been running. But in the last 3 years, it has substantially expanded, which is absolutely fantastic. And we have people from across the CMA and across the professions joining our ranks every day. We have a small office at the moment, but the anticipation is that we will get a bigger space very shortly. And we're super excited about that in the heart of Belfast City. We, as I said, have lots of professions represented, from HR, consumer, markets, CMA does a lot of work in a thing called the Office for Internal Markets, and we now have subsidy advice that we have to deliver to public bodies. So we have quite a few members of the teams there in the Belfast office. And we work, as many of the other speakers have said, on projects that are staffed from across both the London office and across the nation. So it means working on a daily basis with colleagues based across all of our CMA offices, which is great. And we work very well on a hybrid basis. So the IT equipment is fantastic. And as you can see, is working quite well here. We have in the office, our offices are equipped with really high-tech IT. It's just a pity some of us like me are not so good at working it, but we have plenty support for when you need to do so. And as one of my colleagues also mentioned, there's lots of opportunity to travel across the nations and then meet your colleagues, so you don't feel isolated in any one office. I have worked in the CMA for quite a long time, and before that the predecessor agencies, and so I have worked with my colleagues here on the call and others on cartel matters and other antitrust matters, and I have to say that they are great teams. They're highly professional.
No, it's very nice when you do.
Highly, they paid me. Highly professional, very smart, intelligent people, very friendly. Everyone works extremely hard as a team to pull together to deliver the best result and the highest quality work that they can within the time. And it gives you, as a principal case officer or an assistant director, an amazing opportunity to work on really cutting edge cases in terms of competition law. So if that floats your boat, this is where you need to be. You get to wrangle with really often complex factual, legal, economic issues. And as others have said, you have a voice at the table. No matter how inexperienced or new or established you are in the CMA, there's great support and respect for everyone and the skills that they bring. There's also a lot of support for developing your skill set and looking to see what you want to achieve personally from your time at the CMA and where you want to go. And that's really quite prized. And to that extent, once you've been in the CMA for a number of years, or you feel you've established yourself in one skill set, as Erin has said, there's opportunities to move to other subject matter within the CMA. So you're exposed to lots of professions and lots of subject matter and lots of complexity and issues. And it's just wonderful if you're a competition nerd or someone who has looked at this area and thinks, yes, I like these types of things, I want to get stuck in. You get to out and about to do dawn raids or searches, as they said. You get to do document review, you get to do analysis, interviewing parties if that's what you're interested in, and meeting with large organizations across the table and pushing for the right result. If it goes into litigation, then you get to work with our litigation colleagues, and you get to experience that side of it as well. And Deborah's been there and has many t-shirts, but they're all good, and she's been very successful in upholding our decisions, so that's fantastic. But that's really all I wanted to say. If you're more interested in understanding anything about the Belfast office, where we are, how we work, I'm more than happy to answer any questions about either now on this call, or you can contact the recruitment team and they'll pass them on to me.
That's great. Thanks, Elisa. I think I'm going to quickly move on to Tom. Last on our list, we wanted to just briefly run through just a quick reminder on the application process and deadlines. So Tom, do you want to run us through those, and then we can wrap up with the questions that are coming through in the chat?
Thanks, Deborah. Hello, everyone. My name's Tom. I am a senior recruitment advisor here at the CMA, based in lovely sunny Cardiff. So I'll be overseeing the recruitment campaigns for our assistant directors and principal case officers in our cartels and antitrust teams. You can find the adverts and candidate packs on Civil Service Jobs, but I'll also post some links to them into the chat in a second. So as Deborah mentioned, I'll just run you through just a brief outline of the application and interview process for these vacancies. So here at the CMA, we use the Success Profiles recruitment framework in line with the rest of the civil service. This is comprised of various elements, but in particular, we will be focusing on the areas of behaviours, experience and technical skills. You can find further information and links to these on the adverts and in the attached candidate packs. The applications process will comprise of a CV and personal statement that you'll submit through Civil Service Jobs. Now, we do adopt a blind approach to sifting applications, which means that the hiring panels cannot see your name or any identifying information. They will evaluate your suitability for the posts purely based on the skills, experience and knowledge that you demonstrate in your application. For the CV, we'd just be looking for a summary of responsibilities, your experience, positions you've held, and any relevant qualifications. However, to ensure anonymisation, please don't include links to publications, LinkedIn profiles, etc., or anything that will identify who you are. The personal statement, so this will be based on the essential criteria that's outlined in the adverts and candidate packs, and we'll be looking for you to evidence how you meet each of these criteria and provide examples where possible. For the interviews, so we have a single stage interview process here. Keep it nice and short and hopefully fairly simple for you. So you'll be asked to complete a 45-minute in-tray exercise on the day, which will be given to you just before you start. You will also be asked to deliver a 5-minute verbal presentation on a topic that will be sent out in advance, and the panel may have some follow-up questions just to explore this. Following this, the panel will then move to some behaviour-based questions in which they're just looking to explore some examples and evidence of how you have demonstrated these criteria and find out a bit more about you and your experience. The behaviours you'll be assessed against can be found in the advert and the candidate packs, with various links for you to review and read over if you wanted any extra insight or information. To help you increase the depth and quality of responses, people often ask, how does the civil service do their interviews? What's a good way to approach it? For the behaviour-based questions, we do recommend that you can use something like the STAR method to help structure your responses. This is when you focus on the situation, the task, the actions you took, and the results that came from that. Rather than providing a generic overview, it just helps to give a specific example in a nice, clear and structured way. We do have vacancies for assistant directors and principal case officers. You are welcome to apply for both. If you are interested in both, then you will need to complete 2 separate applications. However, if you are shortlisted for both, you won't be expected to complete 2 interviews. It will be 1 condensed interview based at the higher grade, in which you'll be assessed against both levels. If you require any support or adjustments to help you complete an application or at the interview stage, you can either flag this in the assistance required section of the application form, or you can get in touch with us. Contact details are listed on our adverts, and I'll also put my details in the chat in a second. And then finally, the team have mentioned that they're based in a range of offices for us here at the CMA. So these opportunities are open to Belfast, Cardiff, Edinburgh, London and Manchester. The closing date for applications is 11:55 p.m. on Monday, the 25th of September. And we are looking to have interviews around week commencing the 9th and week commencing the 16th of October. But if you do have any questions regarding the recruitment process, I'll pop my details into the chat and you're more than welcome to contact me directly. I did see a question in the chat, Deborah, just while I'm on now, just around I believe whether you have to be a British national. Did I see a question? British citizen.
Yeah.
So no, candidates are not required to be UK nationals, providing that you have the appropriate right to work in the UK and meet the civil service nationality rules. All these details are in the adverts. We do welcome applications from people residing overseas. However, if you are successfully appointed, you must be based in the UK before your start date. But if anyone has any questions around any of that, then I'll pop my details into the chat for you now.
Great, thanks, Tom. And
No
I can
worries.
my colleagues have been furiously typing away to answer some of your questions. I'm going to abuse my power as chair to say our investigations are civil, but I started when I joined the CMA. One of the most exciting things I did was a parallel civil investigation with a criminal cartel case. So we do have criminal cartel powers, and we are on the lookout for kind of criminal cases against individuals as well. And that can throw up some really interesting issues. We also sort of investigate more on the individual side when we're looking at directors' disqualification. I know that's also been mentioned in the chat, and that's something that we're very much looking at now as a follow-on to most of our cartel cases. We'll consider whether there are any directors in the UK and apologies, and antitrust cases. So we'll consider director disqualification as well there. So we don't, the criminal side is on the cartels side of the fence. I get confused because I'm now on both camps, Christiane, you see, doing antitrust cases and cartels cases. Also, in terms of working on one case, I mean, we've talked about big investigations, and when they are big, you'll often be on one case. But as I said, something like leniency or in antitrust pipeline work will allow both our PCOs and our assistant directors usually to have other things kind of bubbling along alongside that one big case. So please don't feel you're kind of stuck on one case forever and doing nothing else. We do try and give people a real balance of work, because we know that just working on one case can be very intense sometimes. What else? I was going to chip on also on the UK law. Look, we're enforcing UK law post-Brexit, but we do still have to think about, my goodness me, we still have to think about what's going on internationally, and lots of our cases are throwing up some really interesting jurisdictional issues, issues of international cooperation. So we're definitely not just sitting in the UK just thinking about UK issues all the time. It's much broader than that, I would say. Another point, I don't know, Christiane, if you want to come in here as well. I just thought it might be useful to clarify when people might think of coming in at the PCO, principal case officer level, and when people might think about coming in at the assistant director level. So I know you've heard from a couple of our speakers. I mean, generally, I would say at the principal case officer level, we're expecting past people who might not have had as much experience, who might therefore benefit from more supervision or support within the team. It's not to say you won't be perhaps leading on particular work streams, but you won't be doing what the assistant director might be doing, you know, juggling multiple different work streams and doing more of the strategic thinking. Is that fair to say, Christiane?
Trying to find my camera. I'm not very fast. There we go. Yeah, no, I think it's right. I mean, to some extent, it does depend on level of experience and a combination of factors. So if you've got very limited or no competition experience, then the principal case officer role might be a better role for you, at least. And then obviously you can learn, as Sarah mentioned, you can go on the King's course and can quickly get promoted if you demonstrate, if you've got the skills, like in any job. And we definitely support people in progressing depending on what they want to do. So I think it really does depend on the level of experience that you've got is probably the big determining factor between a principal case officer and an assistant director role. And as Erin has showed, you can quickly progress.
That's great. And just to clarify, we've had a question there about whether this campaign is linked to the legal advisor. There is a separate legal advisor campaign going on, which I think closes today. So please hurry if you're thinking about applying for those roles. It is a separate panel. So if you're interested in applying for legal advisory roles, please do put in a separate application for those. What we've tried to do is streamline our process for cartels and antitrust. So we will consider, if you've made 2 applications for the grade 7 and the grade 6, we can consider those, but the legal recruitment will be run by a separate team in the legal services team.
And just in relation to one question around what's the difference between legal service role and a delivery role, I mean, I tried to answer, but I could have probably carried on typing, written an essay on the subject. I mean, there isn't fundamentally, there's different. If you're in legal civil service role, you're effectively advising the case team, you're advising the decision makers on the legal points, as opposed to the delivery team who are really driving forward the actual investigation. And they're doing the investigating, they're drafting the documents, they're responsible for actually delivering the project. I would say there is a lot of fluidity, however. So my previous case, I had an assistant director from the legal service who was my assistant director on the case for its duration. And similarly, plenty of colleagues will spend a period acting as a legal assistant legal director or principal legal advisor, and just mix and match. So there are plenty of opportunities to move around and sort of get experience of both sides. But we do all work together, and very, very often, as in any organisation, you may find that you need more resource on a team. And because we have a team base, it may well be that the legal advisors plays more of a delivery role for a particular period of time, and indeed vice versa if you've got the skills. So even without a formal secondment,
I mean,
it's very flexible.
You probably already said, but I don't think quite the answer was in the chat, but it is a broader role perhaps, and maybe closer to liaison with the parties as well when you're in the delivery role as opposed to the legal role, where you're engaging with all of the professional advisors on all of the broad points around case strategy and delivery and timings, as well as any legal points.
I think if you're in private practice, the delivery role is much closer to what you would do in private practice, where you're actually bringing the information together, drafting it, and dealing with your competition.
I sort of feel like delivery is the heart of the case, really. So it sort of feels like your case, and you will be the one, as I said, getting expert advice from an economist about particular points, but it will be your job to bring the case home, write the case up. So yeah, that was certainly, I mean, I actually joined from an international arbitration background, so not the competition background, and that was very much, I liked being in control of cases, I liked handling parties, and all of that I found they've been brilliant skills to use in cartels. I also did the King's course, so it definitely, that career progression and the support for people, recognising that people have got transferable skills, I would say is a real theme across what the CMA does. And Erin touched on our major minor kind of programme, which we're starting to think about, and we've seen brilliant take up actually of people that want to try different areas. So you maybe came into cartels, but actually you've always been interested in working on a consumer case, and it's just allowed people some opportunities to try things, but still have that kind of home department feel. I am conscious of time. Sue looks like she's going to come in.
Well, there's quite a lot of questions, I think, about if I'm not a lawyer, if I'm not an economist, if I'm not in regulation, and I'm in a different sector, should I apply? Will I be suitable? Will I be disadvantaged? And I do want to say there's quite a lot of people across the organisation who've come in from lots of different diverse routes. Hopefully Sarah showed that, but there are plenty of others who come in directly at PCO level and even at AD level, where they've been able to demonstrate, I think, those transferable skills. And that's the key. Look at the skills, look at the description of the job, and think about the work that you're doing and the experience that you've got, and try and see if you can match across. Because if you can match well across, then you can talk to us about that, and we can consider that in the application and in the interview. So it certainly doesn't discount someone because they're not from that legal or economic or regulatory environment.
And we've tried to sort of please do look at that person's specification, because those are the things that we as a panel, that's what we'll be looking at when we're reading the personal statements that come through. So please do sort of bring out, we want to hear about your experience on complex enforcement or regulatory cases, and we want to hear about a track record of undertaking complex analytical work. It doesn't necessarily need to be, as we've said, in the competition sphere, but we will need people who are able to undertake that kind of work, and we're happy to give support to develop the kind of the competition knowledge alongside that.
Maybe for help, I mean, in the last 2 years, I'd say we've recruited to principal case officer roles or sought to recruit, you know, people who've worked for professional bodies like the Midwifery Council, or who, you know, who investigate professional misconduct. So that's the sort of investigations that we are also including in there, as well as, you know, anybody who's worked for a regulator, people people like Sarah who've you know, got far more limited experience, come in at junior roles but make very quick progress because they've got the skills there. So, you know, it's very varied, the backgrounds of people
and I think we really value that, actually, because I mean, we've talked a bit about the scope of cases that we take on, but actually having that breadth of experience and background, it's really valued, I think, here in the work we do.
And the diversity that it brings is quite good and quite healthy, I think, in many ways as well.
Great. I think we're close to the end of time. I think we've answered most questions in the chat. Tom's posted details there. If you do have questions about the roles, please get in touch and we'll find the right person to handle your query. Otherwise, I'm just going to wrap up with a big thank you to all of our speakers today and for the team who helped make the technology work. So thank you very much. Good luck with your applications and enjoy the rest of your evening.